Let's just picture it for a second. You've got 43 US Marines kitted out with all the high-tech gear of the 21st century. And then poof, they're dropped right into the middle of the Roman Empire. It's one of those classic who would win debates you see online, but what would actually happen? Well, that's what we're digging into today. So, let's get right to it. This is the big question. A tiny, modern elite unit against literally thousands of hardened soldiers from one of the most legendary empires in all of history. I mean, on the face of it, it just sounds completely insane, right? An impossible fight. But, as you're about to see, the answer is way, way more complicated than you think. And let's be really clear about the numbers here, because they're just staggering. We have 43 Marines on one side. That's it. On the other, at least 5,000 Roman Legionaries. And that's not even counting all the extra support troops they usually had with them. It's a numbers game that seems completely, totally unwinnable right from the get-go. Now, given those odds, you probably think you know how this story ends. And you know what? In the most likely, most realistic scenario, you'd probably be right. History actually gives us a pretty clear idea of what happens when super advanced technology slams into an army that has no idea what it's about to face. The strategy for this is literally called shock and awe. And the goal here isn't just to win the fight physically, it's about psychologically shattering your opponent. You hit them with something so powerful, so fast, and so terrifying that their brain just short-circuits. Their will to fight just completely evaporates. And this is a perfect real-world example. Back in the 16th century, you had just 168 Spaniards facing 8,000 Inca warriors. The Inca had never seen guns. The sound, the smoke, people dropping dead from a distance, it must have seemed like black magic, like the gods themselves were attacking. They panicked, they broke, and they were defeated without a single Spanish casualty. And chances are, this is exactly what would happen to our Romans. Yeah, but let's be honest, where's the fun in that? A one-sided beatdown that's over in 5 minutes? That's boring. So for the rest of this thought experiment, we're going to make a huge assumption. Let's just say this Roman legion is made of guys with nerves of absolute steel. They will not break, they will not run, they're gonna fight to the last man. Because as soon as you take that instant panic off the table, the whole thing gets way more interesting. It becomes a real chess match of strengths and weaknesses, where having a rifle isn't the only thing that matters. So first up, the gear. The Marines have their M4s, M27s, some grenade launchers, and a couple of M240B machine guns. The Romans? They've got their classic setup, the Gladius sword, the Pilum javelin, and that big scutum shield. Now, Roman armor is not going to stop a bullet, not even close. But that's not where the real contest is. It's all the other stuff that starts to make this a surprisingly even fight. And this is maybe the single biggest deal breaker in the whole debate: logistics. A Marine platoon is designed for short missions. They're carrying a few days of food, tops. The Romans, on the other hand, were absolute masters of supply. Their legions were basically moving cities, built to survive for months or years in hostile territory. The only way the Marines can get more supplies is by raiding villages, and in this world, that's a huge, huge risk. And why is raiding so risky? Because it forces the Marines into tight spaces, like narrow village streets, and that completely gets rid of their biggest advantage, long range. Even worse, their modern gear is designed for mobility, which means arms, legs, and faces are exposed. A legionary's armor? Well, it might be useless against a bullet, but it offers way better protection from a sword and a back alley. You know, the Romans could just choose not to fight a big open battle at all. They could use an ancient tactic called scorched earth. Just burn all the crops, poison all the wells, and wait. They could literally starve the Marines out, making all that incredible firepower totally useless as they slowly run out of food, water, and eventually bullets. But the Marines have one massive advantage, an ace up their sleeve that the Romans could never, ever see coming. And that's night vision. The ability to see perfectly in the pitch black dark. To the Romans, that's not technology, that's a godlike power. This lets the Marines completely own the night. They can move, they can raid, and they can attack with almost zero risk once the sun goes down. Okay, so let's say the Marines use that night vision advantage to get what they need and pick the perfect spot to fight. How does the actual battle go down? Well, this is where modern tactics slam headfirst into ancient formations. So the Marines would definitely want a fight on a big open field to get the most out of their rifles. And they've used a tactic called bounding overwatch. Think of it like a lethal game of leapfrog. One squad lays down a storm of bullets, pinning the enemy down, while the other squad falls back to a new position. They can just keep doing this over and over, creating this moving wall of death that makes it almost impossible for the Romans to get close. Which brings us to the single biggest headache for the Roman commander. How in the world do you get your 5,000 guys with swords across hundreds of yards of open ground while they're being ripped to shreds by weapons they can't even begin to understand? Well, their classic march forward in a tight block formation would be a death trap against grenades and machine guns, so their only real option is to use their biggest asset, numbers. They'd have to spread out into a massive line, maybe a mile wide, and try to wrap around the Marines. And their best bet would be to use a brutal but probably effective tactic, a human wave. Send a first line of lightly armored, expendable troops charging forward for the sole purpose of drawing fire and dying, so the main force can advance behind them. But this is what they'd be charging into. 950. That is the number of rounds a single M240B machine gun can fire every minute. The Marines have 3 of them. We're talking almost 3,000 rounds a minute. It would be an absolute meat grinder, just a horrific sight of ancient bravery meeting industrial age killing power. And the math here is it's brutal. For the Marines to actually win this thing, each of the 43 soldiers would need to kill around 117 legionaries. Think about that for a second. Every single Marine has to be a perfect shot, making every bullet count, all while thousands of guys are screaming and charging right at them. There is zero room for error. And just when you think the Romans' job couldn't get any harder, we haven't even talked about a few other game changers. The Marines have grenade launchers that can just blanket an entire area with explosives. And what about tear gas? The Romans have no idea what that is, no defense against it. One canister could take hundreds of soldiers out of the fight, leaving them blind, choking, and completely helpless. So, after all of that, overwhelming firepower versus overwhelming numbers, who actually wins this crazy showdown? The answer, and it might not be what you want to hear, is it really all depends on who the better commander is. The Marines win if they get to fight their kind of battle. Quick, decisive, on open ground where they can use their range and their night vision. But the Romans win if they get to fight their kind of battle, a long, drawn-out war of attrition. If they can force the Marines into a city, cut off their supplies, and use their massive numbers to eventually trap them. And that right there is the real takeaway. This was never really about spears versus rifles. It's a timeless lesson in strategy. The winner isn't just the side with the better toys. It's the commander who's smart enough to force the enemy to fight on their terms. Of course, there is one final little wrinkle we haven't even touched on. What happens if, in the heat of battle, one of those Marines accidentally kills one of their own great, you get the idea, ancestors? Does that create a time travel paradox that makes them just blink out of existence? Well, that's probably a question for another time.